Welcome to Life Stories. In today's tale, we follow James Anderson, a millionaire trapped in a world of wealth, status, and superficial relationships, when his luxury car is accidentally scratched by a humble bakery worker named Livia. Something unexpected begins to change in his life. Their worlds couldn't be more different, yet their connection grows deeper, challenging everything James thought he knew about love and happiness. Join us as we explore a story of personal growth, love, and breaking free from societal expectations. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel to start the story today. James Anderson had everything that most people could only dream of. He had wealth, fame, and a lifestyle full of luxuries. Every day seemed like it had been carefully crafted for his enjoyment, from private jets to exclusive events. Everything he did was surrounded by people who admired him for what he had. Not who he was, but there was a hollowness inside him, a gnawing feeling that money, fame, and status couldn't fill. One crisp autumn afternoon in New York, James left a high-end cafe with his usual steaming cup of espresso. It was a typical day. The city's vibrant energy never slowed. And neither did he. As usual, he was preoccupied with his phone, scrolling through business emails from partners and clients. He hardly noticed the world around him, caught up in the flow of his own routine. The streets bustled with pedestrians, the honking of taxis and the occasional roar of a motorbike cutting through the traffic. As he turned a corner, something startled him, a sharp, unmistakable sound that cut through the noise. It was a scraping sound that made him stop in his tracks, his heart skipping a beat. He whipped his head around, his gaze falling on his sleek silver Aston Martin parked just ahead of him. A long scratch marred the gleaming surface of his door. His breath caught in his throat, and for a split second, everything seemed to freeze. James wasn't just a millionaire. He was a man who prided himself on his wealth, and his car was a symbol of that. No one had the right to damage it. He turned quickly, searching for the culprit with a fierce glare. There, standing a few feet away, was a woman. She was holding on to an old, rusted bicycle, her face wide with alarm as she took in the damage. She didn't belong in his world. Her clothes were ordinary, a faded denim jacket, worn skinny jeans, and a pair of scuffed sneakers. Her brown hair was hastily pulled into a ponytail, a few loose strands framing her face. But it was her eyes that caught his attention the most. Sharp, gray, and filled with a sense of independence that seemed to challenge him. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice tinged with panic. "I didn't mean to. I just parked and didn't realize." James looked at the scratch, then at her. Normally, he would have been furious. He was used to people being awed by his possessions, and no one ever dared to touch them. This car was a part of him, a statement of his success. The cost to repair it would no doubt be astronomical. But instead of anger, he found himself calm, almost detached. He raised an eyebrow, meeting her gaze. "Are you okay?" he asked, his tone surprisingly soft. The woman blinked in surprise, as if she hadn't expected him to react this way. "I'm fine," she replied. "But your car." "The car can be fixed," he interrupted. "You, on the other hand, can't." He didn't know why he said that, but it felt right. There was something about her, something different, that made him pause. Her shoulders relaxed a little, and she let out a small laugh. "I guess not," she said, her anxiety easing. "I'm Livia," she added, her voice a little more steady now. "Ethan," he replied, surprised at the ease with which he said his name. Normally, people were so eager to introduce themselves to him. But with Livia, it was almost like they were equals. She wasn't trying to impress him with pleasantries or empty flattery. It was a strange but refreshing feeling. "You're not mad?" she asked, raising an eyebrow in disbelief. "Would getting mad change anything?" he asked, his voice laced with genuine curiosity. She paused, considering his words, and then a small smile tugged at the corners of her lips. "I guess not," she said, almost as if she were allowing herself to relax for the first time since the incident. For the first time in a long while, James found himself genuinely interested in a conversation that had nothing to do with business or his usual circles. He found himself studying Livia, this woman who had somehow managed to avoid the trappings of superficiality that surrounded him daily. There was something refreshingly real about her. She wasn't impressed by his wealth, his position, or the status that so many others sought. "Do you live around here?" he asked, almost absent-mindedly, trying to keep the conversation going. Livia nodded, looking down at her worn sneakers. "I work at a bakery nearby. I usually ride my bike because it's more convenient." He glanced at the old bicycle she was holding. It was clearly well used, the tires worn from years of use. "I'm guessing bakeries don't pay much," he said, his tone light. She shrugged. "I don't work there for the money. I love baking. I love seeing people smile when they get their favorite pastries. That's what matters to me." Her words struck him. It wasn't about profit or power for her. It was about passion, a concept so foreign to him. In his world, people chased money and status. People would do anything to climb the corporate ladder. But here was Livia, so different, so sure of what she wanted in life. She was living for herself, not for the approval of others. James found himself silent for a moment, processing what she had said. A cold breeze swept through the street, and Livia tugged her thin jacket tighter around herself. James noticed how thin it was, how underdressed she seemed for the weather. "Do you have time for a cup of coffee?" he asked. Almost impulsively, Livia narrowed her eyes, skeptical. "Are you asking me out for coffee?" He chuckled, surprising himself. "Yes. To make up for this little accident." She studied him for a long moment, as if weighing her options. Finally, she gave a small nod. "All right, but I get to pick the place." They ended up at a small, cozy coffee shop on the corner, far from the luxury spots James was accustomed to. The interior was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the cold, polished world he usually inhabited. Livia ordered a cappuccino while James stuck to his usual espresso. As they sat and talked, the conversation flowed easily. James had never felt this comfortable with anyone, especially someone so different from his usual crowd. For the first time in ages, he felt like he was truly being seen. Not as a millionaire, not as a businessman, but simply as James. And somehow, that made all the difference. As they finished their coffee, the sky outside had darkened. Livia checked her watch and sighed. "I should get going." James, for reasons he couldn't fully explain, felt a strange twinge of regret. Something about this moment, this connection, felt different. "Can I see you again?" he asked before he could stop himself. Livia tilted her head, considering his request. Then she smiled. "If you happen to stop by the bakery early in the morning, I might save the best pastry for you." James chuckled. "Then I guess I'll have to stop by." With that, she waved and rode off on her bike, leaving James standing there, intrigued by something he couldn't quite define. It wasn't just a fleeting interest in a woman. No, it was something deeper, something that made him question everything he had known. It wasn't just about business or wealth. It was about a connection that had nothing to do with money, status, or the world he had built around himself. Something about Livia had changed him, and he couldn't help but wonder, could this encounter, this unexpected meeting, change everything? The days following that encounter felt different. For the first time in what seemed like forever, James found himself excited for something beyond business deals and board meetings. It wasn't just curiosity, it was something deeper, something he couldn't ignore. Every morning, he found himself waking up earlier than usual, his mind drifting back to the small bakery where Livia worked. The smell of fresh pastries, the warmth of her genuine smile, and the authenticity in her eyes called to him in a way nothing else did. The first morning after their coffee, James stood outside the bakery long before the sun had fully risen. The windows glowed with the promise of fresh baked goods, and the scent of warm bread and coffee drifted out to meet him. Livia was behind the counter, her hands skillfully decorating pastries as though she had been doing it for years. The simplicity of her life, the joy she found in something so ordinary, had begun to pull him in like a magnet. When she saw him, she chuckled. "I didn't think you'd actually show up," she said, a playful gleam in her eye. James shrugged. "I don't break promises." Livia grabbed a small tart from the display and handed it to him. "Here, I saved this for you. But if you think you can eat without paying, I'll have to charge you a service fee." He pulled out his wallet and laughed. "I'll gladly pay for it. So'd I get a discount for being a regular?" "Only if you come at least 5 times," she replied, smirking. James took a bite of the tart. The buttery crust and the sweet, tangy raspberry filling melting on his tongue. It was unlike anything he had ever tasted. There was no pretense in it. No attempt to impress. Just a simple, honest treat made with love. As he savored the taste, he realized that it wasn't just the tart that had captivated him, it was Livia herself. They sat and talked for a while, discussing everything from the weather to their childhoods. As the morning rush picked up and Livia had to return to work, James left the bakery with a lingering feeling that he couldn't shake. He had started to look forward to these quiet moments, these simple exchanges. It was a welcome change from the flashy, status-driven conversations he had with his business partners. In the following days, James made a habit of visiting the bakery every morning. He would order something small, maybe a coffee or a pastry, and sit for a few minutes to chat with Livia. The more time they spent together, the more he found himself drawn to her genuine nature. There was no pretense with Livia. She didn't care about his wealth or his name. She just cared about who he was in that moment. One afternoon, after a particularly long meeting with some clients, James was having drinks at an exclusive finance industry event. As he chatted with a few business partners, he noticed a familiar face across the room, Lucas Sterling, his longtime friend and colleague. Lucas raised an eyebrow and approached him. "You've been disappearing lately," Lucas said, crossing his arms with a smirk. "I heard you've been spending a lot of time at a bakery." James took a sip of his wine, unfazed by Lucas's teasing. "I like pastries," he said nonchalantly. Lucas laughed. "Don't tell me you actually care about this woman." James stiffened, his gaze hardening. "She has a name, Lucas. It's Livia." "Whatever," Lucas said, shrugging. "But don't you think she's a little different from the people you usually hang around with?" James knew exactly what Lucas was implying. Livia wasn't a business executive. She wasn't the daughter of a billionaire. And she didn't fit the mold of the women he was used to dating, women who cared about his wealth, his power, and his status. Livia had none of those concerns. She didn't care about what the world thought of her. And that was part of why James found her so intriguing. "I don't see why this is any of your concern," James replied, his voice growing colder. Lucas chuckled, but there was an edge to his voice. "You're one of the most influential people in finance. If you start a relationship with someone outside our world, it's going to affect your reputation. And trust me, the media won't let this slide." James felt a twinge of irritation, but he managed to keep his composure. "I don't need anyone's permission to date whoever I want." Lucas's smile faltered. "You might think that, but you don't live in the real world, James. You can't just change the way society works because of some bakery girl." James didn't respond. He didn't need to. The conversation left a bad taste in his mouth. It was the first time someone had tried to dictate his choices. And it made him feel trapped in a world he no longer wanted to belong to. But the more James thought about it, the more he realized that he didn't care about his reputation. Not anymore. The world he had built for himself, the parties, the fancy dinners, the superficial connections, it all felt meaningless now. It was Livia, this woman who lived for passion and purpose, who had shown him what really mattered. And he wasn't going to let anyone, not even his closest friends, dictate his life. Not when he had finally found something real. As the days passed, his visits to the bakery became more frequent, and each moment spent with Livia felt more significant. She had given him something he hadn't even realized he had been searching for. A sense of peace, of authenticity, of being seen for who he really was. And for the first time in a long time, James felt like he was living life on his own terms. As the weeks went by, James and Livia's connection deepened in ways he hadn't expected. He found himself waking up early every morning, eager to get to the bakery before the hustle and bustle of his usual day took over. What started as a curiosity about her life and the simplicity of her world quickly evolved into something more profound. With every visit, James discovered more about Livia, her passion for baking, her unwavering sense of self, and the way she carried herself without needing validation from anyone. She was everything his world wasn't. She wasn't concerned with status or wealth, she was focused on the little joys in life. The more he learned about her, the more he realized just how far removed he was from the genuine simplicity of her life. He had been chasing empty goals, wealth, recognition, and power, but here was someone who valued the moments in between. Someone who knew what it meant to be happy with what you had, rather than always striving for something more. But despite the growing bond between them, James knew that their relationship wasn't without challenges. He had already begun to notice the whispers behind his back. His colleagues and friends from the finance world, who were all too familiar with the superficial games of power and money, weren't as discreet in their judgments as he had hoped. Every time he stepped into the room at one of their gatherings, the glances, the subtle gossip, and the raised eyebrows were impossible to ignore. One evening, at an exclusive finance event, James stood at the bar with a glass of wine, listening half-heartedly to a conversation about the latest market trends. His mind, however, was somewhere else, on Livia. He hadn't seen her for a couple of days, and he couldn't help but miss the easy comfort of her company. But then, as he turned around, he saw Lucas again, this time with a more serious expression on his face. Lucas approached him, crossing his arms. "You're really serious about this, aren't you?" Lucas asked, his voice edged with concern. James met his gaze, feeling the weight of his words. "What do you mean? You've been spending more and more time with her. This bakery girl," Lucas said, glancing around the room. "Don't you realize what this could do to your reputation? You're not just anyone, James. You can't afford to be seen with someone like her." The words stung, but James stood firm. "Livia's not like the people you know. And frankly, I don't care about reputation anymore." Lucas shook his head, frustration crossing his features. "You can say that now. But when it all blows up, you'll see what I mean." James didn't reply. The conversation felt suffocating. Lucas's words were a reminder of everything he had been trying to escape, the shallow expectations. The people who only saw him as a symbol of wealth. For the first time, James didn't feel the need to defend his choices. He was done justifying his life to anyone. His connection with Livia wasn't something that could be measured by the rules of his world. The next day, James tried to reach out to Livia. He sent her a message, asking if they could meet. But it was clear something was different. Her responses were curt, her usual warmth replaced by an unmistakable distance. He felt the unease settle in his chest. Had he done something wrong? Was she starting to pull away? Later that evening, he arrived at the bakery, hoping to find her, but she wasn't there. He waited, his mind racing with doubts. Finally, Livia walked out, a newspaper in hand. Her expression was unreadable, and she handed him the paper without a word. James glanced at the front page, his heart sinking as he saw a candid photo of them from one of their coffee dates. The headline mocked him: "Millionaire James Anderson and his unequal romance with a bakery girl." His stomach twisted. He knew that this was exactly what Lucas had warned him about. The media would seize on their relationship, twist it into something it wasn't. Livia looked at him, her voice quiet but filled with a quiet hurt. "I didn't think I'd end up in the tabloids," she said, her eyes downcast. James felt the anger rising in him, but he swallowed it down. He stepped closer to her, his voice gentle. "Are you okay?" She gave a small, humorless laugh. "I'm fine. It's just, I didn't sign up for this. The media, the judgment, the way people are going to look at me." James's heart ached for her. He understood, more than he could put into words, how her world was suddenly being turned upside down. But he couldn't understand why she seemed so distant now. "You know I don't care about any of this, right?" he said, his voice firm. despite the tremor in his chest. Livia shook her head, her expression conflicted. It's not just about what you care about, James. It's about how everyone else sees it. The people around you, your world, they're not going to accept this. They'll judge me. They'll judge us. James could feel the weight of her words. And it crushed him. For the first time, he realized how much their worlds were at odds. His world, where money and status meant everything. And hers, where simple joys and authenticity mattered more. But that didn't change how he felt. He had to prove to her that they could overcome this divide. I don't care what anyone thinks, he said, stepping closer to her. You and we have something real. I'll fight for it, Livia, if you'll let me. She looked at him for a long moment, her gray eyes searching his face, as if weighing the truth of his words. Finally, she sighed, the tension easing from her shoulders. I just don't want to lose myself in all of this. I like my life, my work, but with you, everything feels complicated. James reached out, taking her hand in his. I don't want to change you. I want to learn how to live like you, genuinely. Without letting status define me. As long as you're with me, I'll find a way to make this work. For a long moment, they stood there, their hands intertwined, the noise of the city around them fading into the background. And for the first time, James felt like he was standing at the beginning of something that could change everything, not just for him, but for them both. As the days passed, James and Livia's connection grew stronger despite the challenges they faced. James began to shift his priorities, focusing less on the world of finance and more on the quiet moments he shared with Livia. He found joy in simple things, like watching her work in the bakery, helping her decorate pastries, or sitting together with a cup of coffee after her shift. He had learned that happiness didn't come from wealth or status but from being authentic and embracing life as it was. Livia, too, had begun to understand that James was different from the people in his world. He wasn't interested in her for her social status or for the things she could offer. He loved her for who she was, her passion, her kindness, and the way she lived with intention. Slowly, the walls between their worlds began to come down, and the love between them flourished. One afternoon, as they sat outside the bakery, watching the hustle of the street and the warm light of the afternoon sun, James turned to Livia and smiled. What if I opened a bakery with you one day? He asked. Half joking, Livia laughed, her eyes sparkling. You? Baking? You'd probably burn down the kitchen. James chuckled, but there was a sincerity in his voice. I could learn, he said, and if it's with you, then any life is the one I want. Livia rested her head on his shoulder, her heart full. They had both learned a profound lesson. Love wasn't about what you had, but about who you were with. It wasn't about the lavish parties or the money. It was about the simple, real moments that mattered most. Together, they had found a love that wasn't defined by wealth, but by the connection they shared. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more meaningful life stories.